Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Langell. Christina, how are you today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're going to talk again about the crisis in EMS funding that Pennsylvania has been undergoing for many years now. And there has been a call for more creative ways to solve this issue. You covered that earlier this week, so tell us more about what some of those creative ways are.
Well, currently there is a budget proposal to add $30 million for a competitive grant for volunteer fire companies. And that would be something that would make a big difference for a lot of companies who currently get about $15,000 usually from the state per year in grant money. That's, it's not competitive. So pretty much everyone gets it. Otherwise, most of their funding comes from fundraising, which used to work really well when volunteers had a lot of time to also be fundraisers and usually also work a job. And it's just become a bit too much for them to maintain. Municipalities do fund as well, but they can't fund it fully. So one of the things that has been really encouraged is asking different fire companies in a local region. So like if you have maybe 2 or 3 serving the same geographic area or nearby geographic areas, asking them to potentially combine and work together. That's something that's been, a tough ask because people obviously have a lot of pride in their fire companies, and a lot of times there's a long legacy behind them. So the idea of being absorbed into another company or merging in some way is not an attractive idea for a lot of people, but it might be a necessary one. There's also, new strategies to sort of incentivize volunteers, but those are also, expensive strategies. So, Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis visited Berkeley Hills, which is in the Pittsburgh area. It's in Ross Township, and they have this great live-in program that provides a place for people to live and requires them to do 40 hours in shifts per week. They get all of the training and experience that they need. If they want to go on and become career firefighters in a paid company like Pittsburgh's, they can go on to do that with that experience that they've built there. But, to do that, they've had to build an 8-bedroom, 3-bathroom place for people to live. And they have to, supply everything for those people to live. So it's not a cheap solution, but it is one that has worked for them in terms of recruitment. But there's, still like every other volunteer company in the state, which is most of the state's fire network, they're still struggling with funding.
So do you think there's a good chance that this additional funding will come through for them?
That's a good question. So Governor Shapiro has been really pounding the bricks on this issue lately. Obviously, there was the terrible arson incident at the governor's residence, and he's really used that as a springboard to draw attention to this issue. It's a very critical issue, but it has been for a long time, and we still haven't seen a ton of aid going out to our volunteer fire system. So it's hard to say because we're looking at a most likely very contentious budget, and, every little bit counts, especially with Republicans having a lot of concern about the deficit that we're operating on. And so I think it's kind of anyone's guess what gets funded this year.
Fair enough. I think too, what is hopeful for this issue is that there's a lot of bipartisan support because this issue also really affects Republican districts, these rural communities where they really rely on these volunteers. And of the things that Republicans and Democrats and Governor Shapiro have been able to come together on, this is one of those issues where I think that they found common ground. We also saw it with teacher stipends. We see it with other mental health programs in schools, other things that make it so that the well-being of not only residents in the state, but the people who care for them, that is seeming to be prioritized by both parties. And, we are a month away from June 1st, and June 1st is the start of budget season in earnest. So you will be keeping an eye on what happens next, right?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll be following whether it gets funding. And then the interesting thing specifically with fire equipment and rigs is that even if those grants come through in the budget and our fire companies are able to apply for the grants, get the grants, let's say they get $5 million, they're going to buy a new engine. Well, then they have to kind of contend with this really big issue is a national problem, but there are a very small number of companies producing fire equipment, specifically like the big engines and stuff like that. And as that sort of monopoly has condensed, they have really increased both the price and the delivery time for buying or repairing parts. Representative Emily Kincaid, who represents the district that Berkeley Hills is in, was at the fire company with the lieutenant governor, and she mentioned that it can take 3, 4, 5 years between when you order that rig and when you actually get to use it. So they were talking about trying to come up with other creative solutions that can support firefighters, because even with the funding, there's little you can do if you still have to wait for the actual resources that you need to come through. So I think that's another area where we can kind of circle back to companies pulling their resources together, because sometimes you'll have, several trucks in an area that maybe it's kind of disproportionately allocated. But again, that requires like some sharing, and when you've spent a whole lot of money, or your municipality has kicked in a whole lot of money for you to have something, there's going to be a little bit of tension in bringing that together and using each other's resources.
All right, Christina, thanks for joining us today. To keep up with this story and more, follow us at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.